The red-eye from JFK to LAX in April 2022 was maybe two-thirds full, which is unusual for that route. It almost always books out. I remember checking the manifest twice before pushback because the load looked wrong to me. It wasn't wrong. That's just how the flight came out that night. I was working the back galley by myself. 6-hour flight, wheels up at 10:40 p.m. Eastern. The lead flight attendant was up front, another two in the middle section. Once we cleared service and hit cruise, most of the cabin got their eye masks on and the rest went to their phones. That's what a red eye looks like from where I stand. A tube full of tilted heads and blue light. Around 1:30 in the morning, cabin time, I did my first check walk. Nothing on that walk was strange. I want to say that plainly because later, when they asked me, I went back over it 100 times in my head. The lights were dimmed to that dark blue you get on overnights. Every row I passed, I did the little scan. Seatbelts, phones on trays, anyone sitting up who might want water, standard. Row 34 was the last row before the lav on the port side. Only one person in it, on the window. A man, maybe late 40s, wearing a gray zip-up hoodie and jeans. He was awake. He was looking out the window. He had a bottle of water on the tray, the cap still on. When I passed, I said, "You doing okay?" The way you do. Quiet, and he just gave me a small nod without turning his head. Fine. Not weird. People stare out the window on night flights all the time, sometimes for hours. I noted the row in my head only because he was awake, and awake passengers sometimes ring for something later. I went back to the galley, made myself a coffee out of the pot we brew for ourselves, and stood there for maybe 20 minutes. I answered a couple of call buttons up in row 28 for blankets. Then I did my second walk. Same aisle, same rows, nothing on the way up. On the way back, I got to 34 and I stopped. There were two people in the row now. The man was still on the window, same hoodie, still looking out. Sitting one seat over from him, in the aisle, was a woman, small. Dark hair pulled back tight, a puffer jacket zipped up all the way to the collar. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she was staring straight ahead at the seat back in front of her. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. The middle seat between them was empty. My first thought was that I'd missed her on the first walk somehow, that she'd been in the lav or bent down grabbing something from under the seat. I do this job long enough. I know that happens. People move. Someone gets up to stretch and comes back and you didn't clock them. Fine, but 34 was supposed to be a single. The window was the only booked seat. I kept walking, calm, back to the galley. I pulled the tablet out of the dock and opened the manifest. Row 34, one paid seat, 34A, male passenger. B and C listed as unoccupied. No upgrade, no gate change, no revenue standby moved back. I refreshed it. Same. I stood there for probably a full minute, holding the tablet. I could feel my ears getting warm. The usual explanation is a passenger moved themselves. Happens more than people realize on light flights. Someone up front sees empty rows in the back and takes one. Against policy, but it happens. I checked the manifest for anyone assigned to a middle elsewhere. 4 names. All 4 still active in their original rows on the crew tablet, which pulls from the seatback IFE login. 2 of them had movies playing, so she wasn't a reseat, not that we had a record of anyway. I walked back up. This time I stayed further away from the row, just past the lav, and I looked without looking, the way you learn to do. She was in the exact same position, hands folded, facing forward. The man was still on the window. Neither of them had moved. He wasn't talking to her. She wasn't talking to him. They were not sitting together. In that way you can tell when 2 people are together. There was a whole seat between them. I went up to the woman in the aisle, put on my normal voice and said, "Hi there, sorry to bother you. Could I check your boarding pass real quick?" She looked up at me. I want to describe this correctly. There was nothing wild in her face. She didn't look scared or drunk or high. Her eyes were completely steady. She looked at me for maybe 2 seconds. Then she turned her head slowly and looked at the man on the window. He didn't move. His head was tilted a little against the plastic wall. His eyes were closed. His mouth was slightly open. He was asleep. He had not been asleep 4 minutes ago. She looked back at me. She said very quietly, "He has it." I said, "Ma'am, I need to see your own boarding pass, not his." She said, "I don't have my phone with me right now." She said it the way you'd say you left your umbrella at home, just a small inconvenience. No apology, no fumbling in her pockets, nothing. She wasn't reaching for a bag under the seat. There wasn't a bag under the seat. I checked. Both foot spaces were empty except for the man's backpack under 34A. I told her I'd come back in a minute and to please stay in her seat. She nodded once. I walked, not fast, up to the front. I told the lead what was going on in a very short sentence, the way we do. She went to the interphone and called the flight deck. I stood in the forward galley with my hands flat on the counter, and I remember I could feel every seam in the metal. The captain came back on the interphone maybe 90 seconds later. He'd pulled the manifest from his side. 34B and 34C, empty. He asked if we had a real safety concern. The lead looked at me. I said I didn't know. I said the woman wasn't aggressive. I said she was just there. We were about 2.5 hours out from LAX at that point. The decision was made not to divert. Instead, one of the mid-cabin attendants and I did what we're trained to do, which is nothing dramatic. We kept eyes on the row. We didn't confront her again. I brought her a cup of water at one point, and she took it and said thank you, and set it on the tray without drinking. The man in 34A never woke up for the rest of the flight. Not for the water, not for anything. I checked his breathing twice from the aisle. He was breathing fine. He was just out. The lead radioed ahead. When we started descent, the captain came on the PA and did the normal script about local time and weather. Nothing about the row. Nothing about anything. From the cabin, it was a completely normal landing. At the gate, they held everyone in their seats. That's when the passengers started to figure out something was up, because you can feel a plane that isn't deboarding. 2 officers came on. They went straight to 34. They spoke to the woman first, quietly, and she stood up without any argument and walked off with them. Then they woke the man in 34A. He was confused, groggy, kept asking what happened. They took him off too, separately. The rest of the cabin filed out. A couple of passengers asked me what was going on. I said what we're supposed to say, which is that everything was fine and to have a good day. I was in a room at LAX for about 4 hours after that with 2 people from the airline and 1 from the TSA. I wrote it all down. Times, positions, what I said, what she said, the exact wording of he has it. I remember they made me repeat that part. Here is what they told me later, and what I pieced together from what got asked. The woman had come through security at JFK using an ID that belonged to someone else. The document itself scanned clean because it was a real valid ID. The issue was that the person it belonged to had reported it lost months earlier, and it was flagged in a database that, in the specific screening lane she went through that night, wasn't being cross-checked the way it was supposed to be. A procedural gap. She'd walked through a legitimate checkpoint on a legitimate document that should have pinged and didn't. The boarding pass she'd used at the gate was for a completely different flight. Same terminal, gate 2 down from ours, boarding around the same time. They think she stood in our line, handed her pass to the agent during a rush, and the agent scanned it without looking closely at the destination. The scanner would have beeped. In a busy boarding, agents sometimes wave people through and figure it'll get sorted at the seat. Nobody sorted it. She walked on board, took a lightly booked back row, and sat down next to a stranger who was asleep or close to it. The man in 34A didn't know her. He'd never seen her before. He'd taken a sleep aid about an hour into the flight because he had a meeting the next morning. He remembered nodding at me on my first walk. He remembered nothing after that. She didn't have any weapons on her. She didn't have a phone. She didn't have a bag. She didn't have a wallet. She wouldn't explain why she was on that plane. Not to us, not to anyone who talked to her that night. As far as I know, they eventually charged her with the ID stuff, but I don't work in that world and I stopped getting updates. I filed a full report. About 6 weeks later, operations sent out a bulletin about a procedural update at gate scanning, specifically about beeps on wrong flight scans requiring a full stop and manual override. No exceptions. They didn't mention me, and they didn't mention the flight. They didn't have to. I still work the red eye. I still do the back walk. When I get to the last row and there's someone in it who wasn't there 20 minutes ago, I check the manifest before I say a word. I've worked in deep sea biology for 11 years, and until September 2022, the strangest thing I'd ever seen at depth was a chimera with a tumor the size of a golf ball. That trip changed the ranking. We were about 340 nautical miles west of the Chilean Trench, on a chartered research vessel I'll just call the Meridian because half the crew still works with that outfit. 9 of us on board. 2 ROV pilots including me, a geologist named Petra, our chief scientist Kwame, a sonar tech we called Rooster, a cook, a captain, a first mate, and a grad student on his first cruise who threw up for 6 days straight and got the nickname Bucket. The mission was mapping, straightforward, nothing exciting. We were running a tethered ROV, an old Comanche-class unit the university had rebuilt twice. My shift was 2200 to 0400. I liked it. The bridge was quiet, the coffee was mine, and the ocean at that hour felt smaller than it does at noon. On the 3rd night at station, we picked up something that wasn't on the survey plan. I was steering the ROV about 11 meters off the bottom, running a lawnmower pattern across a soft sediment plain. The lights caught the edge of what I first read as an outcrop, and I flew the unit closer. Then the outcrop moved. I actually laughed. A quiet little laugh, alone in the bridge, because whatever it was big. Not whale big, but maybe 4 meters across if I was reading the parallax right, and shaped wrong for anything I could name. Flat body, tapered on one end, a soft crest along the spine that ran with pale blue light, slow pulses moving from head to tail, no visible eyes, no jaw structure I could pick out. The glow would fade, then rise again on a beat of about 6 seconds. I watched it for 2 minutes without moving the ROV. It didn't retreat, it didn't turn toward the light. It just sat there, breathing that soft blue rhythm, like it hadn't noticed us at all. I called Kwame. He came up in a t-shirt and slippers and stood behind me with his arms crossed for maybe half a minute before he said quietly, "Hold position." We recorded for 40 minutes. Nothing changed. Whatever it was, it stayed put, and it stayed lit, and the ROV camera got everything we could want. At some point past midnight, I needed a smoke. I know. I'm one of maybe 3 people left in marine science who still does it, but at that hour with that image on the screen, I really wanted one. I asked Rooster to slide into the pilot chair and just hold the ROV steady. "Don't touch the joystick," I said. "Don't touch anything, just watch." I was gone maybe 6 minutes. Deck, cigarette, half a cigarette really, back inside. When I came in, Rooster was standing up. He said, "It left." I looked at the screen. Empty bottom, just silt and the faint groove where the thing had been sitting. He hadn't moved the ROV. I could see the depth and heading logs on the second monitor, flat lines. The organism had just gone. Kwame shrugged. Animals do things. We noted it and moved on. Except the next night, running a parallel line about 200 meters south, we saw it again. Same body plan, same pulse. I was in the chair. I called Kwame up. We watched it for an hour. This time when I stepped out for coffee, I asked Petra to sit down. "Just watch," I said. "Don't touch anything." By the time I got back to the bridge with a mug in my hand, the seabed was empty. Petra was looking at me strange. She said, "It left about 90 seconds after you did. We didn't talk about it that night. I want to be honest about that. We didn't talk about it because it sounded stupid. The third night I set it up deliberately. Found the animal, or one very much like it, on the plane, watched it, then had Kwame swap in without telling me exactly when. He timed it. 3 minutes and 12 seconds after his hand was on the joystick, the organism folded itself down along the bottom and slid off the frame with a slow, unhurried motion like it had gotten a text and had to be somewhere. He got up. I sat down. 22 minutes later, the ROV was running the same pattern, and I passed over another one, or the same one. I have no way to know. At this point, we started keeping a log, not the ship log, our own. Petra kept it in a green notebook. Times, who was piloting, what the animal did. Over 4 nights, we logged 17 encounters. Every single time I was at the pilot station, an organism showed up in the survey window within an average of 8 minutes. Every single time somebody else took the chair, either no organism appeared, or the one on screen left within 4 minutes. I'd like to tell you I thought this was funny. I didn't. I felt like something had picked me out of a lineup. I don't know how else to describe it. When I sat down at that pilot station, the seafloor 2,000 meters under us knew. The turning point, if I have to pick one, was the 5th night. I was piloting, and one had settled about 15 meters from the ROV, and I had gotten close enough that the camera was pulling real texture off the crest, tiny hair-like structures moving in the current. Kwame said very calmly from behind me, "Get up." I got up. I did not touch anything on the way out of the chair. I walked to the back of the bridge and stood by the door and watched. Rooster took the seat. He didn't touch the joystick. He didn't touch the thruster keys. He didn't even lean forward. Nothing on the ROV changed, physically, in any way I could see. The animal left. It took maybe 40 seconds. It didn't bolt, it flowed, and the crest lights dimmed as it went, like something turning off a lamp on its way out. I sat down on the deck and put my forehead on my knees. Kwame designed the blind test the next morning. He wouldn't let me be involved in the design, which I understood. Bucket, the sick grad student who had finally stopped throwing up, was the one running it. He and Petra worked out a schedule where they'd have someone in the pilot chair for 40-minute windows, rotating, and the person outside the bridge wouldn't know when they were up. I wasn't allowed to look at the ROV feed at all during my off windows. They stuck me in the galley with a book. 12 windows over 2 nights. 6 with me piloting, 6 with someone else. I didn't know the order. The results were clean. In all 6 of my windows, an organism appeared and stayed. In all 6 of the others, either nothing came, or what came left within minutes. Bucket ran the numbers on a laptop over breakfast on the 8th day and told us the correlation was 100%. He said it twice, like he wanted us to correct him. Nobody corrected him. I want to say I slept that night. I didn't. I lay in my bunk and listened to the hull ping and thought about how the ocean under us had picked me, personally, out of 9 humans on a boat, and how it kept picking me, and I could not put together in my head what kind of world that was. Petra figured it out. Not that night. 2 days later, in port at Valparaiso, sitting in the wet lab with a cup of instant coffee that had gone cold, she was looking at the ROV control signal traces Bucket had exported, and she stopped and said my name and asked me what was on my wrist. I was wearing a bracelet my mother had given me before she died. Copper alloy, thin, 3 narrow bands twisted together. I'd worn it every day for 6 years. I never took it off. Most of the time I forgot it was there. Petra had me sit at a bench pilot rig they'd set up for testing. We ran the ROV control signal through a scope. With the bracelet on my wrist, resting near the joystick where my hand always sat, there was a tiny, consistent modulation in the control frequency. Not enough to affect the ROV, not enough that any human would notice anything. A drift of a fraction of a percent, riding on top of the carrier. She had me take the bracelet off. The modulation went away. We went back out 3 weeks later on a shorter run. I left the bracelet in a drawer in my cabin. I piloted every night. We saw the animal twice, at distance, and both times it behaved the way any deep-sea animal behaves around a bright light on a strange machine. It moved on. It didn't wait for me. It didn't care who was driving. Kwame wrote it up. It went into the literature under a name I won't repeat here because you can find it in 10 seconds and I'd rather you didn't. The description talks about the crest, the pulse rate, the sediment preference, the depth range. It talks about the animal's behavior around artificial light. It's a good paper. Petra and Bucket are on it. I'm on it. The bracelet isn't in it. Nobody agreed not to mention the bracelet. Nobody agreed to mention it either. It just wasn't the point of the paper, is what Kwame said, and I nodded, and that was the end of that conversation. The bracelet is in a drawer in my apartment in Seattle. I haven't worn it since Valparaiso. Every so often I open the drawer to check that it's still there. A piece of metal on a wrist, for reasons nobody in the paper mentions, spoke to something at the bottom of the ocean in a voice only it could hear, and whatever answered me. I got laid off on a Tuesday, and by Thursday night I was doing 80 on 287 north of Amarillo with no plan and half a tank of gas. That's not a metaphor. I mean, I literally didn't have a destination. I packed a duffel, told my roommate I'd be back when I was back, and got on the highway. I figured I'd drive until I felt like stopping, sleep in the car, drive some more. My savings could handle a week of that before I'd have to think seriously about what came next. The stretch of 287 past Dumas at 1 a.m. on a weeknight is about as empty as a road in America gets. You get maybe one set of headlights every 20 minutes coming the other way. Between those, it's just you and the yellow line and whatever's flat and black on either side. Wind farms with their little red lights blinking way off in the dark. A gas station every 40 miles that may or may not still be in business. My Camry is a 2004. The head unit is factory. It plays CDs I don't own anymore and picks up FM if you're patient with it. I'd been running a Spotify playlist through my phone speaker in the cup holder because the aux cable in this car died about a year ago and I never replaced it. Around Stratford, my phone finally gave up on service and the music cut out mid-song. So I turned on the radio. The whole way up, I'd been getting religious stations, farm reports, and static. Now I hit scan and it just rolled through the whole band and found nothing. Rolled through again, then it stopped on 8:30 a.m. A man was talking, middle-aged voice, soft. Not a preacher, not a DJ. He sounded like someone sitting across a kitchen table from you. And the thing about losing a job, he was saying, is that it doesn't feel like losing a job. It feels like being told a secret about yourself. Like somebody finally said the quiet part out loud. I remember I actually laughed. Out loud, in the car. Because come on, what are the odds? I figured it was one of those late-night AM shows for truckers, a guy with a small syndication who fills 3 hours a night with rambling and callers from Iowa. I settled in. The signal was clean. Weirdly clean for AM at that hour on that road. No fade, no drift. He kept going. No music bed, no commercials, no station ID, just this man talking. He told a story about getting fired from a construction job in the late 80s. His foreman calling him into the trailer and not looking at him while he said it. He talked about walking out to his truck in the parking lot and sitting there for 40 minutes because he didn't know how to go home and tell his wife. He talked about the specific quality of shame you get from that, which he said was different from other shames. He said it stains the back of your throat. I've never heard anyone put it like that before, but I knew exactly what he meant. That was the taste in my mouth for 2 days. I passed the Oklahoma line, kept going. He told another story, something about a business he tried to start in '91, a small engine repair shop, and how it failed inside of a year. He talked about the day he had to call his father and ask for money. He described the phone, an olive green wall unit in his kitchen, and how he wrapped the cord around his fingers while it rang. I don't have a father to call. Mine died when I was 19. But the part about needing to ask and not knowing how, I understood that too. An hour in, I noticed I wasn't looking at the road properly anymore. I was driving, my hands were on the wheel, but my attention was all on the speaker. It felt like being read to as a kid, that thing where you're not exactly listening, you're just letting it happen to you. He said, you start bargaining with yourself in these times. You tell yourself if you can just get through the next month, then it's the next week, then you're bargaining hour to hour. I was doing that, not the month or the week, but I'd been counting mile markers. Just get to the next one, then the next. I want to be clear about something. He wasn't saying my name. He wasn't describing my apartment or my ex-girlfriend or the exact way my old boss cleared his throat before saying anything difficult. It wasn't like that. It was more like every specific he named was a specific I also had. A different specific, but the same shape, same weight. That's worse. That's what I want to explain. If he'd said my name, I would have laughed and pulled over and looked for the camera. Because he didn't, and because everything he said still landed, I started to feel something I don't have a good word for. Somewhere past Boise City, Oklahoma, I turned the volume down, not off, just down, so his voice was very quiet, and I could still hear it under the noise of the tires. He was talking now about his brother, about a fight they'd had over their mother's house after she passed. He said, I want to tell you I regret how I handled it. I do, but regret's not the same as knowing what I should have done instead. I still don't know what I should have done instead. I have a sister I haven't spoken to in 14 months. Over something so small, I couldn't even tell you what started it now, only what it turned into. I pulled off at a rest stop outside Elkhart, Kansas. Concrete picnic table, one working light, a payphone that had been ripped out of its housing at some point and never replaced. I sat in the car with the engine off and the radio still on. He was quieter now, talking slower, like he was tired. He said, the mistake I made, and I made it for a long time, was thinking that if I just kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel any of it. Turns out you carry it either way, you just carry it faster. I sat there for a long time. At one point I said out loud, who is this? The radio didn't answer. He just kept going. Talked about a dog he'd had. Talked about the smell of a particular diner in a particular town I've never been to. Talked about the way his wife slept with one hand under her cheek. Around 3 in the morning he said, well, that's about all I've got for tonight. You take care out there. And then the signal cut and I got static. I sat with the static for a minute, and then I turned the key. I drove home, straight back down 287, watched the sun come up around Wichita Falls, got to my apartment a little after 10, slept until the afternoon. When I woke up, I tried to find the show. Here's where it gets stupid. I couldn't remember hearing a station ID. I didn't know what the show was called. All I had was 8:30 a.m. and a general region and the sound of the guy's voice. I typed in every combination I could think of. Late night talk show, Texas AM radio, 8:30, overnight host, whatever. Nothing was matching. Then I tried a phrase he'd used. That thing about shame staining the back of your throat. I didn't expect anything. The third result was a fan-run archive, a plain white page with a list of episodes. The show had run out of a small station in Lubbock from 1992 to 1996. Overnight slot, midnight to 3. No callers by design, just the host, talking. The station killed the show when they got bought out and switched to a syndicated format. Most tapes were lost. A handful of listeners had recorded episodes off the air on cassette and uploaded them years later. The host's name was on the page. There was a photo. Younger than he sounded, dark hair, a mustache, standing next to a mixing board in what looked like a converted closet. The site had a bio at the bottom. He died in 2003. Heart. He was 51. I sat looking at the screen for a while. The episode I'd heard was from March of 1994. Some guy in Amarillo had recorded it off his kitchen radio and uploaded the file in 2011. It had 32 views before mine. I don't know how I picked it up on my drive. I know about skip propagation, how AM signals bounce off the atmosphere at night and travel a long way from where they started. But that was a live broadcast, almost 30 years gone. What I heard had to be someone rebroadcasting the archive. Maybe a pirate station running old tapes for their own reasons. I looked. I couldn't find anything about it. No forum posts, no complaints to the FCC, nothing. I've stopped trying to figure it out. I listened to the rest of the archive over the next couple weeks, sitting at my kitchen table mostly, with the lights off, in the same chair I used to sit in to send out resumes. He talks about his failures, one a night for the better part of 4 years. He never gets famous, never gets a bigger show. The station lets him go, and he goes quiet, and a few years later he dies. None of that is a story. I'm aware. I keep waiting for it to become one. I got a new job in June. It's fine. Not what I was doing before, and the pay is worse, but I get up and I go to it. My sister called me on my birthday, and we talked for 2 hours, and neither of us mentioned the fight, and now we text sometimes. I still listen to him at night. There are 90-something episodes on the archive. I've gone through them twice. I know his voice better than I know most of my friends' voices at this point. I don't think he was talking to me. He wasn't. He was a guy in a closet in Lubbock in 1994 talking about his own life to whoever was awake. But somebody was awake. Some nights I think about that. The guy in Amarillo who hit record. The 31 people before me. Whoever's out there tonight running that signal, if anybody is, he didn't know me, I never knew him, it shouldn't count for anything. It counts for something. Thanks for making it to the end with me. Now I want to hear from you. Which 4chan story did you like the most? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to watch the other creepy videos on the channel. Catch you soon. Bye.